This is Kathryn Goetzke, host of the Hope Matrix podcast. We are here to share science, stories, and strategies for how to hope. I'm the Chief Hope Officer of the Shine Hope Company, and Shine is the mnemonic for how we teach hope. So when we talk about hope, we talk about how we use stress skills, happiness habits, inspired actions, nourishing networks, and eliminating challenges, which are our thinking patterns that get in the way of our ability to hope. Hope is a skill. You can measure hope, you can teach hope, and you can start practicing skills to activate higher hope in your life today. And on this Hope Matrix podcast, we aim to bring in guests, experts in science, people with stories, and those that have strategies for activating hope in your life. All right. Welcome to the Hope Matrix podcast. Super excited to have you all here listening today. And we have as a guest one of my favorite although that's not a word, researchers in the world around hope. She has taught me so much about hope and has been really instrumental in all of the work that we're doing around hope. So I'm super grateful. We have today Dr. Crystal Bryce here. Welcome to the show today, Crystal. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. This is so exciting and I love talking about hope. So let's do it.
I know. Let's do it. I feel like I've known you forever, but I've really only known you like maybe 3 years. I don't know.
Right. I feel like it feels like forever. And I feel like we've made so much progress and done so much. But I think I want to say like 3 years, 2.5. But yeah, it feels like way longer.
I know.
In a good way.
Yeah, right. I mean, especially because I've learned so much from you, in the work you have done and are doing. And so, yeah, the first time I read about you was in an article on, I think it was Edutopia. I don't even know if that's how you say it. Yeah. But you were writing about colleges and college levels of hope and why hope was important on the college campus. So we'll get into that a little bit, but I want to first take a step back and just tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, where you're at, what you're doing, all of that, so they get a sense of who you are.
Sure. So I am currently the Associate Dean of Student Affairs at the University of Texas at Tyler School of Medicine. But before this, I was at Arizona State University forever. So I did my undergrad, my master's, and my Ph.D. there. And my Ph.D. is in family and human development. So I really focused during my training on the early childhood education and kind of social context and what happens during those early years. Then I was brought on as a faculty member, and I somehow just, we had a community partner who was doing research on hope, and I said, oh, that's kind of interesting. I've never done that before. Also, I had only really done research on little kiddos. So it was kind of a big switch, but I started reading about it and learning about it. And I said, this is something that is fun to study. It's exciting. It's positive. It's so action-based. And so that's kind of how I made that shift into studying hope, specifically in those adolescents and the college age students. And then the rest, right, that's how we met. And so that's kind of where my hope research has primarily focused on, although we're trying to do some research in the little kids. There's a lot brain development wise that is a little harder in those little guys. But yeah, and then I started working with you on some of the research on hope and in the college setting, and then I made the shift to this great opportunity over in Tyler.
It's wonderful. Yes. The shift you made that you promised would never happen.
I 100% made that promise. And maybe that's how stuff happens in the world sometimes. You say, oh, I'm not going to go anywhere. And then I think it was a year later.
Yes.
I had to say, oh, Kathryn, I'm actually going to a different school, but we've kept it up, right? We're still going. And my dean's been super supportive of this research and kind of just how do we make sure we keep thinking about hope and keeping it alive.
Yes. Love it. And I always say never, because when you say never, then it means probably.
Yep, basically.
Yeah. So, I mean, for those that don't know, about 10 years ago when I started my work, I was working in mental health, and I found, was studying hopelessness, and I found the science of hope. And so Dr. Bryce is an expert in the science of hope. So we're so lucky to have her here teaching us more about hope. Can you share more about, like, when we talk about the science of hope and the skills of hope, what does that even mean?
Yeah. So whenever I would meet people, especially when I first started studying hope, they would give me this like side eye, like, you do what? What is that? And so I would always say, hope is a cognitive skill. It's malleable and it's not squishy. So I don't study squishy hope, which is funny, but people really, it sticks with them, right? It is a skill. It's something we can really develop. It's focused on goals. So when I study hope as a scientific concept, it's really about goal setting those goals, identifying goals, big picture, little picture, all the things along the way, and feeling and being able to identify paths to reach your goals, as well as feeling like you can pursue those paths. And those are the two key parts, right? You got to have both. Can I figure out how to get there? Feel like I can follow that path. And then what's going to happen inevitably is there is an obstacle, right? There's a bump in the road. So what do? Well, I got to start rethinking, what other paths can I take? Now, do I feel confident in taking those paths? Yes or no? And so it's really thinking about ways that we can build the skills to make sure that you can identify those paths and you feel confident in doing it, because it feeds off each other, right? This happens and this happens, this happens and this happens. And so it's making sure that we really feel confident in pursuing those paths to reach those goals. And sometimes we've got to pick different goals, and that's okay. And we're going to get defeated, and it's going to be hard, and we might have low hope in that time, but we've done it enough, hopefully, that we're able to get back on path and figure out what we got to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, teaching people that hope is a skill is a completely different way of thinking about hope, because we use hope so much in the language.
Yes.
There's a famous book, Hope is Not a Strategy, that I kind of combat in the business world, because I would say hope is a strategy. And I think one of the most important strategies is, when you think about businesses are all about reaching goals and,
Exactly.
having self-efficacy, finding pathways, creating new pathways, re-goaling when we need to re-goal. And so, yeah, it's a different way to think about hope. And as you say, not the squishy hope. I say not hope as a wish, but hope as an actionable thing for something you want in your future. It can be anything, can be health related, education, kind of any of those things. So talk about the hope scales. How are they measuring how hopeful you are?
Yeah. So there's a handful of hope scales out there. The one that really aligns with the research that I've done are the scales that are done by Snyder and his colleagues. And so these ones really focus on, again, right, if this is a behavior, if this is something we can measure, if this is an action item, let's focus on what's happening, right? How do we measure your thoughts on identifying paths and how you feel like you can do it? And so the hope scale is a pretty quick scale, and it asks two sets of questions. One is about identifying those paths. Am I able to identify paths to reach the goals I want to reach? And then the other set of questions is about, do I feel like I can take that step that I need to take? So kind of a level of almost confidence or self-efficacy in reaching those goals through those paths you identified, right? And I think that's the key, is you can't just identify paths, but they're so out there you don't think you can do it, because you're not going to do it then, right? You're not going to be able to feel like you can do it. But if you pair them together, that's where we're going to see that high hope happening. Yeah, I can find my path, and I know I can do it. Or I know I can at least try, and we're going to give it our best, and we're going to see what happens. And so maybe we don't have the highest hope because we're not 100% certain that I can do this, but I'm going to try it, and I'm going to go for it. And we're going to see that that's then going to, over time, your hope scores would increase, right? Because hopefully, ideally, right? You get that reinforcement that it worked. I was able to take that path. So I feel good next time. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really how we built out and part of how we built out the framework and how we're teaching hope. And when I started this work 10 years ago, looking at those scales and figuring out what were the components that were important. And, are we taught goal setting processes, how to overcome obstacles, how to create new pathways, re-goaling, kind of all of these things, why our networks are important for hope, how to eliminate our thinking patterns to hope. So all of these things. And these are all skills that can be taught. And so can we get into the outcomes? Because to me, they were talking about they'd done all these studies on outcomes as it relates to hope. At the time, they weren't teaching me how to be hopeful, but I looked at all of the evidence around having higher hope and what that led to. And so can you speak more to that in different settings?
Yeah. I say this jokingly, but it's not. High hope is related to all the good things, and increasing all the good things and reducing all the bad things. And so this is, I think, why studying hope is fun, because it's it's a skill. We can teach it. And it's related to better academic outcomes in the kiddos. It's related to college retention. It's related to reducing stress and reducing anxiety and reducing depression. And so, and that's just in your kind of younger population, but even in medical settings, it's related to better adherence to treatment. It's related to better outcomes. It is really a great set of skills to have, because it is related to all of these outcomes. And we've seen it in the literature from the little kids, those early adolescent, that really critical time, all the way through, older geriatric patients. You see it throughout to see that this is something that can be so useful. So I think that it's literally all the things, which is so exciting.
Yeah, it is so exciting. I saw a study recently that I loved because I've been thinking through, we have programs now for different populations, and I've been thinking about how we teach it to little kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I saw is that when little kids watch their parents or their their guardians playing a game, if the guardians give up on the game quickly, those kids mimic that behavior, that kind of hopelessness, behavior. So an interesting way to start doing an intervention for young kids, which is really fun and exciting to think about, because when you learn the skills young, I feel like that they just get, and what we've seen with our kids in the 7 to 10-year-old, it just becomes a part of them. It's, to me, for me, learning how to hope when I was 42 was not, so many of these things are just really embedded patterns and behaviors now, and thought patterns. And so it's really rewiring every part of myself. And
those little ones, they're like sponges. So let's get in and teach them these things, because like you said, when you learn it when you're 5 or 6 or 7, you have it your whole life. We can build those skills throughout. And it's not to say that at 42, you couldn't do it. You could do it. But how great is it then instead to say these kids have had this their whole lives, right? So at 42, they're refining, they're keeping up, and they're finding new ways. And they have that really solid base that they've had for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible. So one of the things you did during COVID, you did a study on hope that I really love the foresight you did in looking at this and outcomes as it related to how we did during COVID. So can you share more about that study?
Yeah, definitely. So we had partnered already with a school district, and we were collecting data. And I think that this is probably how a lot of studies during COVID happened. We collected data in early 2020. Early March, right? Everything's good. And then COVID. And so we had already had in place this relationship with this district to measure all students 5th through 12th grade. in the entire district. And so when 2021 came around, they had at that point, they had, I want to say mostly gone back to in-person learning, but we were still surveying them. And so we had this really rich data set we didn't obviously plan for this to happen, but we had information on what was their hope in 2020 and what did it look like in 2021. And when we think about COVID and all the things that surround it, I don't think we typically think about these positive or these buffer constructs that might actually have helped these students do better during this time, right? Because from 2020 to 2021, they were online learning, as everybody likely was. They were thrown in, let's do this. Teachers are doing the same thing. This is a lot to handle. But what we saw and what was so fascinating and I think important and such a testament to what hope can do is that the students' hope levels in 2020, so pre-pandemic, actually predicted how connected these students felt at school in a good way. So even though these students had talked about how hard it was to be in remote schooling or online learning, those who had higher hope had higher levels of connection with school and with those peers. And so, this is, I think from a scientific perspective, fascinating because they weren't in class. They weren't even physically at school for most of that time. But that hope let them still feel that connection. And we know how important that connection to school is for those students thinking about when they return to school, making sure that they're kind of re-engaging with their peers and the teachers and how that kind of helps support them as they get older and continue back and get reacclimated to what does a school environment look like. So I would imagine for those who had that high hope, that reacclimation was a lot more smooth than those who maybe had lower hope.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it really makes sense. You think about it when you look at COVID, right? Big obstacle, big challenge that we have. How do we navigate around that challenge? How do we stay connected with people in innovative ways? And during COVID, I saw so much of the focus on everything that we can't control, everything that we're unhappy about with COVID, all of the problems, all of the things we can't do, as opposed to, how can we connect with people in innovative ways? How can we stay connected with teachers? How can we learn in new ways? How can, I really thought as we started experiencing COVID, I thought anxiety and depression, I mean, hopelessness being the key symptom, like, of course, anxiety and depression are going to go up because we're practicing all of the unhealthy ways, all of the ways we're not going to stay hopeful. So, right. Yeah, having that study was really powerful. So how fortunate that you were collecting that data.
Right. It happened by chance, but I think that there was a lot that came out of it that to just show that resiliency that we see, especially in kids, right? I know that's just such a critical time in those, right, 5th through 12th grade, thinking about all high school and puberty and all the stuff that is happening. So for us to be able to kind of see and highlight, like you said, not just the downside, because there obviously were plenty, but part of that study, we also asked them what's been going well in the last year, which you wouldn't typically ask, but we felt like that's so important because you have spent a year at home. And they did. They talked about those social connections and the connections with their families, and then the connections also with school. But, they identified those things that kind of kept them going, I think, in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. I had some friends that had a marathon in their backyard.
Oh, how many times do you have to run to?
So
that's so many.
They did it. But it was all day and they advertised it and they got media involved and they raised money for a local charity. And it was just, but coming up when we're in hard times, innovating around how to do things, so important. And so it was pretty funny. I'll never forget that for sure. And one of the things I love about hope hope is I think it's more of an emerging science. I would say, and that there's still so much to be done in it. But to me, the return on investment, if we can change people's hope, like it's hard to even prove out what the return on investment is. We know, for interventions in mental health, when you're, in mental health, you have an anxiety or depression, interventions are a 4-to-1 return on investment. The World Bank did a report on that. There's some studies 27-to-1 for young kids for interventions on things, but it's hard to even quantify, because when you look at things like retention on the college campus, like how much does it cost universities to lose students, or to healthcare issue? There's so many ways when you think of hope being critical to everything, which it really is. Showing up to appointments, taking your medications, your health, how long you live, all of the things. How do you start even quantifying this return on investment?
That is I feel like that's like $1 million question, right? I do think it is. I think it's an emerging science, and so I think that you hit it on the head there, in that we're still kind of trying to figure out how do we quantify it. What does that look like? I think that some of the work that I've done has looked at college retention. So we did do a study where we looked at students going, we surveyed them the very beginning of these were first semester students. So they are fresh, right? 18-year-olds, they've never been in college, they've never had this experience. And we measured their hope, and then we measured it a year later. So that would be when they're supposed to be at least starting their second year of school. And the other thing that we thought was, okay, well, in college, and when we think about this return on investment and kind of what's being spent, what's going on, we want to keep kids, right? We want you to come and we want you to stay. And we want you to graduate. We want to make it to the end. And so what we actually thought through was, okay, there's some predictors that we know would be, risk factors of students maybe not staying in school. So students who either leave or they're off track or they're not retaining into that second year. And so we identified those and we said, okay, let's think about if you have a lot of those, an average amount or a low level of those factors. And it was important to think about it this way, I think, because those some of those risk factors that we think about for that kind of going into the next year. So kind of what was your GPA coming in? How were your standardized scores? We already at a college level tend to target those students in a good way, right? In a supportive way. We target you to support you and provide you additional resources, or we have you come and do some early, maybe a month early, and you can kind of learn how to get into school. And those programs are meant specifically for a very small subset of students to help them be successful. And that is important. And I'm not trying to say it's not. There is an amount of money that has to go in there, right? So the return on investment for those has to be pretty good because we see those across the nation. But we said, well, what about those other students, the ones who don't quite, right? They're not like low or they don't quite meet those characteristics, but we want them to keep going. We want to make sure that they have, they're retained and they're continuing on. And so in this study, it was fascinating because what we found was in that retention into the second year, for those who were in that middle and that low risk groups, they didn't really have these risk factors, that hope actually predicted if they would come back that second year. So those are the students we're not targeting mostly for interventions, but just their hope skills in that first year, in that first semester, predicted their retention into that second year. And so this really, I think, highlights that teaching hope skills early in school and early on in that first freshman year, their first experience, is a targetable intervention point for colleges that has a large return. So it can be targeting, I wouldn't, even though it wasn't significant that those with higher risk, that it didn't significantly predict retention, I don't think we would ever say teaching hope skills is going to hurt those groups, right? I think that this is a really, and what we took away was this really highlights that early part of college is a great intervention point where you can have, I think, the most bang for your buck in teaching hope skills to get them to come back that second year. We know if we can get them to come back that second year, right, the odds of them graduating are going to be much higher.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you ran our college course. So I created a college course because, hopelessness goes up when we go through times of challenges and transition. And, college is a part of that. So of course it goes up. My aim is to, reduce anxiety and depression, help prevent it, and give proactive skills for how to manage these times of transition from both experts and then recent graduates. Can you just speak a little more, since you did do a study on it that we just got published, which
it should be out any day now.
Okay.
So yeah, that was right. That's how we got started, you and I.
Yes.
That's where we started. So what was really fun with that was we did it at our, when I was at ASU, and we ran it in 2 semesters. So we ran it as a class. It was a 15-week class. There's a handful of weeks that we spent just relationship building. So in the very beginning, I would say probably the first 3-ish, 4-ish weeks was really just getting the students to get to know each other and create those relationships and really be a group that you're comfortable having conversations with. And then we ran through the curriculum across the weeks, and we did it twice. So I had a colleague who ran it the first time, I ran it the second time, and then we had a control group who didn't participate at all. And what was fascinating was that when we did a matched control design, so that means that we had the students who took the class, and then we had a lot more students who didn't because it's a large university. But what's great about that is we were able to match the students on characteristics. So if we had an individual who identified as a Hispanic female in our group that took the course, and had a certain GPA, we could actually find someone who met those same criteria within certain ranges. And so we were really able to be thoughtful about how we made that comparison. And so we could try really make a statement saying, above and beyond some of these other characteristics that we think might make a difference in your hope and what it looks like, we can kind of control for that. So it was still a preliminary investigation, but I think that helped bolster our approach and our findings. But we measured them before the semester and after the semester, and they took their hope scores before and after, and we saw a significant increase in hope for those who took the course, and a decrease for those who didn't. And so what that really highlighted was, even controlling for and accounting for the fact that 2 different people taught it, that this course provided them with more skills in hope, and that it was over such a short amount of time, in 15 weeks, that we saw that change. And that's right, the part that we publish. But the part we don't publish is the conversations I had with these students and how great those were. I had all freshmen, which was the first time I had ever taught freshmen. And so it was a fascinating experience, right? Because these are 18, they're probably mostly all around 18 years old. First time in college. I had a couple students who it was literally their first class in college that they'd ever taken. And you just see them come in, and they're so reserved, and they stay to themselves. And then a couple weeks go by, and they start talking. And then you talk to them, and they're like, yeah, I see them on campus. And someone said, I would have never been friends with you, but I see you on campus, and I want to come up and talk to you now. And they would hang out together. And it's just such a powerful experience, right? Sure. Obviously, the important thing here is we increase that hope. But I think that the way we did it, and having those social connections and those peers, and being able to come into class and be like, I'm really struggling, right? I'm not feeling hopeful today. Let me talk about these things. So I think that's a huge one. And I had students open up to me and I helped them, navigate some things that they had to navigate. I think that connection that they made with me only can help them be more hopeful because they have not only each other, but they have a mentor, if they would say that I was that, or at least I don't want to say adult, right? But the older person in their life that they can go to and ask questions to. So it really helped create that, I think, that network that you need to help hope flourish and be successful.
Yeah, it's amazing. And on college campus, that's so important,
And a big one, right? Arizona State's huge. So I think when I would hear them say, "Oh, we got dinner together," I'm like, "Oh, this is great." Like you told me you would never hang out, but let's do that. And we would do it around campus. We would have we had the secret garden, which is not really a secret, but it's a very nice outdoor area. And they said, "Can we have a potluck?" I said, "Let's do it." So we did it in the secret garden, and it just helped build that camaraderie and that friendship.
Yeah. Yeah, I was shocked and loved as well that a lot of the students said they hadn't learned a lot of the skills anywhere else before going to school. I mean, on the research that we did that, again, we didn't really even get into that in the paper, but I mean, to me, it's pretty shocking that they go through life not being taught some of these fundamental foundational skills that just help us navigate life, right? In healthier ways. And so I'm passionate about getting these skills taught across campuses and colleges because it's so important. And I am, the prime example of I was very hopeless. Unfortunately, I left college and went to many schools, because I didn't have the tool structure, support, skills that I needed to really navigate it. So it comes from and I want students to have those skills. We know too that every student needs at least one trusted adult or person to talk to and needs to identify those people in advance of when they actually need them. And so it's really a whole school approach to try to do that. So I'm so grateful to you for working on this. It's this program and it's a process, right? Learning about hope and studying and how we can activate campuses and get students engaged in hope and being more proactive and about their own skills for hope.
But we know we can do it, right?
Exactly.
So that's the thing. This is just setting us up because we know we can do it. We know it'll help them get into that second year of college. And so it's just doing it, right? Getting it out there.
Yes, making it happen. Yes. Absolutely. One of the other things I want to touch on is so we have the SHINE framework. Our work is a little, we do a lot of Snyder's work. We do the added stuff, I would say, that's different around hope theory is I do the stress skills and happiness habits because I really came at it from hopelessness and being both emotional despair and motivational helplessness. And I think Snyder's work really focuses more on the motivational helplessness kind of directly. And again, so the SHINE framework being stress skills, happiness habits, nourishing or inspired actions, nourishing networks, and eliminating challenges. And part of what we do in Nourishing Networks is we talk about empathy and we touch on empathy. And I know that is your area of expertise. So we are lucky to have your brilliance here. Do you want to just share more around empathy and what we can do to become more empathetic?
Yeah. So I think that empathy is something that maybe it's kind of like hope. We talk about it a lot, but what does that mean and how do we do it? And it might just be the way I was trained, but I think that empathy is something we can develop and it is something that we can nurture. And I've had arguments with people where they say, nope, you're either empathic or you're not. And I think I would have thought that first too. I had that same thought. But when you really look at what is empathy and what does it look like, I think that it's identifying who we're working with and who it is to really say, okay, there's different kinds of empathy. We know that, right? And we know we always talk about our empathy tank. Is your empathy tank full or not? And it's hard. And so I think that that's part of it is, empathy is something that is It is work. It is draining, and we need to think about ourselves while we're doing it. So,
So describe empathy for our listeners. Like, what do you even mean by empathy?
Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, that's a hard one.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
That's I think broadly we always think about empathy and sympathy and compassion, and these are all different concepts that we think about. And so I think that when we think of sympathy, it's really that feeling bad for. We feel bad for you and whatever it is that you're going through. And when we think about compassion, it tends to be much more about what can we do to make this better. But with empathy, I think it's a level of feeling with. So we feel with you. And that's where, I can put myself in your shoes and I can feel what you're feeling. And that's where I think empathy is hard, because when I'm feeling what you're feeling, I'm feeling it, right? Like that's a lot on me. And so some of the stuff that we've talked about, I have a colleague that I've worked with to create an empathy training curriculum, and we started it with undergrads, right? Because that's where we are. That's where we were. And now we've moved it to focus on medical students. And it's that feeling with someone that is hard. So we focus a lot in our medical student curriculum to think about self-empathy. It's hard to feel with someone, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to let ourselves feel that. So we need to be able to say, I need to have empathy towards myself and my feelings and how things are going so that I can be more present and I can be better at whatever it is that I'm doing with the people I'm around. And so, one of the things we always talk about is with our medical students specifically, we have students who or physicians or anyone who has a hard day, right? I've had hard days and I have no empathy at the end of the day. I have drained my empathy tank because I've had students in my office and I'm there trying to empathize with them and be there in the moment and really help them feel supported and figure out, with them, what is the next step. And I get home and my kid has a meltdown because she dropped her ice cream on the floor. And I'm like, I don't have the capacity right now to be as empathic as I can be. To be able to identify that is huge, right? To be able to say, I don't have it in me. I need to take a couple minutes. I need to do whatever it is I need to do to rejuvenate so that I can be there in those situations. And so I think that self-empathy is so huge in medical students, but in all humans, right? It helps me be a better parent when I go home, and spouse and friend and partner and whatever it is, all those hats we wear. When we can say, I don't have this right now, I need some time, because I've been empathied out, so to say.
Yeah, I love that. And that's where I would say the stress skills and
Exactly.
happiness habits come in really handy. But I love the framework around the tank and your empathy tank and really becoming aware of that and knowing that, we're not always full and it's part of life to not always have a full empathy tank, and it gets drained and we need to take care of ourselves. And yeah, self-empathy is so important for that. And the awareness, like you said, and being proactive about caring for ourselves when we're in that state. So that, because if we have no empathy tank, that's generally when we lash out,
Exactly.
addictions, and why the healthier stress skills are so important kind of during those times. I love that. I mean, how many of us out there think our doctors are super high in empathy, and really listening and feeling? And where are our doctors and nurses' empathy tanks, and how are they filling their empathy tanks? What are they doing intentionally about it? And are they even aware that they have empathy tanks?
Exactly. Yes.
So that's why I love that you're bringing it to medical schools. And, even that awareness of it is so important. And then building in those practices and that time to refuel our tanks is so important.
Exactly. I think it's all about normalizing it, right? It is a false statement to say everyone has empathy all the time. And it's a false statement for us to say this to our medical students, for them to think, as a physician, I'm going to have empathy 100% of the time, or I'm going to have no empathy, right? Like, how do we normalize that things are hard? You're going to see hard things, and it's going to affect you emotionally. And we need you to sit with that and not just push it down, right? You need to sit with that, process it, and then figure out, okay, what can I do to help myself? Because if I can help myself, I'm going to be able to better help my patients, right? I'm going to be a better, more effective clinician if I am aware of what is happening to me, so that I'm not just pushing it down and inadvertently, right, acting a certain way in the hospital room or in the when I'm seeing a patient. So that's, I think, one of the biggest things in empathy, in thinking about the medical students and why we want to target them, is because we want to normalize it, right? We want it to be something where you start your first year of medical school. It's normal that you don't always have empathy, but here's what you do, right? And also, let's teach you about clinical empathy, which is figuring out how do I still create those and have those feelings that my patient might have without really feeling them deep down. And so it's you're still empathic, but maybe you're not internalizing it as deeply. And that's going to take practice. Well, we can't practice if we don't know about it. So really getting it in, right, during those early years before the students are out on clinical rotations, and then checking back in. How are you doing? How's it going? Where's your self-empathy? What's it feel like? How are you making sure you're taking care of yourself? Again, we do this early. It's kind of like Hope and little kids, right? We do this early so that when they're off, we're not, they've gone into residencies and they've become, they're in practice. Maybe they have their own practice, whatever it might be, that we've helped instill those early on, hopefully, so that they can do that later. And then instill it in their patients, and right, just have a full circle experience where they're able to say, okay, I know what this is, I can identify it, and I know how to move forward.
Yeah, I love that. And when you think about the impact on patients long-term and outcomes on patient, and I read a statistic recently that 50% of our nurses want to leave the profession. So the impact on retention and teaching proactively, nurses and doctors how to keep their empathy tank full. And I think, like you said, super hard balance. How do we not internalize what our patients are going through? And, if we lose patients or whatever they're dealing with, how do we not internalize that and keep ourselves healthy? It's a very challenging, job. And as you said, awareness is the first key to that. And my guess is that empathy is not in any of the medical education that they're receiving, so as I know that Hope really isn't. And so it's a different way of, and yet so important to patient outcomes. So
yeah, I think that's right. We talk about it in medical education, and we think about ways to do it, and I think it's sprinkled in, but it is much more checklist empathy. Make eye contact, do this, do that, right? Here's your checklist of empathy behaviors, but how do we kind of like Hope, how do we get down into it? How do we really get into the details and the skill building, so that it's not just, yep, I did it, but I can reflect on it and do it again, and maybe do it better and feel more efficacious in being empathic or being hopeful, right? These things are skills, and we can help really cultivate them.
I love that. You are so brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
I am so grateful to know you and to have been working with you. And I've learned so much from you. It's really, and you're so patient with me.
Oh my gosh. This has just been, I remember when you reached out for the first time, and I was like, okay, like, we'll see how this goes. And I'm so glad I did, because this has just been like the experience of being able to be a scientist and a researcher and see other people outside of the research and science community actually believing in the things that you do research on is probably my dream come true, right? I want to just see these things out there in the real world and have others who are not just scientists, not just scientists, who are not scientists, right? That see the value in it and they understand and they say, oh, this isn't just something on paper that we get peer reviewed, but this is something that is so impactful. And I think you're doing that. You're getting it out there and you're getting hope out into the world in a way that is so admirable and I think has a huge potential for impact.
Thank you. I mean, that's what I love and try my best to do. Take all of the brilliant scientists and then create something that we can make it into more common language.
Yes.
That's scientifically informed, evidence-based, but then can become part of culture. And yeah, it's so clear to me how important hope is to life and empathy and all of these things. And how do we concretize it and make it really a part of everyday life and a part of culture and create common language and frameworks that we can use that make sense? Filling up your empathy tank, we all know what it means to fill up a tank of gas. Well, that's what we need to do with empathy. So
exactly. And hope, right? All of it. We just need to fill it. We got to work on filling those tanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've got to be realistic about the fact that we don't always have high empathy, high hope, and what can we do to support ourselves through that kind of process? So thank you. Any final words or thoughts you want to share
No, I think just thank you for letting me do this and having this conversation. And it's just a fun way to get together and talk about the stuff that we love to talk about.
I know it is. Yes. And for all of you listeners, on the Shine Hope Company website, we do have the hope scales. So we have the children's hope scale and adult hope scale. If you want to learn how hopeful you are and what science means by studying hope, these are the scales that we use in our work to date. And it doesn't matter what your score, like it changes over time. The idea is you can get good at it. You can practice skills, you can become better at hope. You can, and it takes work. I always say it's kind of a simple framework, but it's not an easy, it takes constant practice, always learning. So thank you so much for listening. And Dr. Bryce, thank you for being here today. You are amazing. And you do a pretty incredible job of bringing very scientific concepts down to everyday language. So I appreciate you doing that and for joining us and for all the work you do to make this world a better place.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. So thank you all for listening in to the Hope Matrix podcast. We want to shine a light that hope is teachable, hope is measurable and teachable, and provide you with actionable insights for how you can start activating hope in your life today, and provide a framework so you can start talking about hope with other people and practice these skills together because we are better with hope. Please feel free to check out the shinehopecompany.com where we list all of our resources around how to hope. We have a lot of free programs for how to hope, including the 5-day challenge, our hope infographic with a lot of skills that showcase how to hope and articles of how to incorporate hope into your life. We have the Hope Beat Weekly, which is a weekly newsletter that shares strategies for hope. We have a My Hope Story template, so you can write your own hope story today. Also, My Hope Hero, so we can share what our heroes are doing to activate hope in their lives. And this is especially good with youth, so they can start looking up to people that have overcome similar challenges to them and seeing how these heroes use the Shine Hope framework. We have a Hopeful Minds for Teens program, a Hopeful Minds overview, educator guides. We have a new evidence-based college course so you can activate hope on the college campus. There are programs in the workplace, overview courses, 90-minute courses for learning the what, why, and how to hope. What I want you to know about hope is it's a skill. You've got to practice these skills to become hopeful. It's easy to fall into despair and helplessness when we deal with challenges in life, and it takes intentional work and practice to get to hope. And yet it is always possible. So no matter what life brings, keep shining hope. Thanks so much for listening in. Have an awesome day. And of course, I've got to add that this program is designed to assist you in learning about hope. It should not be used for medical advice, counseling, or other health-related services. I, Fred, the Shine Hope Company, and myself, Kathryn Goetzke, do not endorse or provide any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I am not a medical doctor. The information provided here should not be used for the diagnosis or treatment of any medical condition and cannot be substituted for the advice of physicians, licensed professionals, or therapists who are familiar with your specific situation. Consult a licensed medical profession or call 911 if you are in need of immediate assistance. And be sure to know the crisis hotline, 988, if you are in need of support. Thanks a bunch for listening. Take good care of yourself and keep shining hope.